Do you desire a character that has the versatility of martial prowess, as well as the ability to rain cold, icy death from the heavens? Do you want to smite your foes at a distance? Do you want to soar through the sky on a flying reindeer? Well, then this is the build for you. Hey guys, it's Winners, back with another thematic yet optimized character build. And this build is very thematic. With over 5 years of D&D experience in 2 ongoing high-level campaigns, I've honed my skills in both rule mastery and creative character design. If you saw my video last week, I went over the cold damage spells available with the 2024 rules, and I wanted to not only make a build focused on cold damage, but also very thematic with winter and Christmas and just the general holiday vibes. And I would say I have been very successful. This build has a lot of reflavoring of abilities and some interesting visuals that you'll have in your head. And how effective this build ends up being is very surprising to me, especially with the classes I chose to work together. If you're watching this not in December or during Christmas, I originally posted this on December 23rd, if it wasn't already obvious. Before going to D&D Beyond, I'm just gonna stay here and tell you guys about this character. And I'm gonna start with the species. So this character is going to be a gnome, and it's gonna specifically be a rock gnome for many reasons. First of all, rock gnomes I feel like are the closest things you can get to in D&D to the Santa Claus elf or the North Pole elf, whatever you want to call them. But they also have some really good features. Gnomish cunning is one of their best features, and what it does is it gives you advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. They also have dark vision to a range of 60 feet. If your game allows older species options, Snurfeblin, aka Deep Gnomes, might be a better pick for this build, but I'm gonna go with the Rock Gnome. Rock Gnomes get the Mending and Prestidigitation cantrip, and they get this interesting feature that's similar to the 2014 Artificer feature, where essentially they get to create a tiny object and add one effect of prestidigitation to it. This is mostly a fun ability that could have some uses, but I feel like you'd have to be very creative to find use of it, especially at higher levels. But this being a sort of Christmas elf character, it's the perfect ribbon feature for this character. And I wanted to give this character a backstory, unlike some of my other builds. I think it'd be really funny if this gnome was living in the Feywild amongst a group of elves. And this gnome, growing up amongst these elves, thought it was an elf the whole time. But later, it turns out that he's not an elf, and he's actually a gnome. And his father lives in the material plane in the city of Waterdeep, and he's a really high up merchant in the Merchants Guild in Waterdeep. And he is on an adventure to meet his dad. Dad! If this backstory seems familiar, that's on purpose. What I find funny about this is he would have the opposite experience of, instead of being too big for elf things, he would be too small. And a lot of people, when they think of the Feywild, they think of just like a very spring or summer-ish type of area. But remember, the Eladrin are from the Feywild, and there are winter Eladrin. I could see there being parts of the Feywild that are sort of winter themed, and I could see a sort of Santa Claus figure being an Archfey. And this Archfey could have taught this character ways to manipulate ice and wind and snow in the place he grew up. For the background, I'm going to be going with a custom background. Skill proficiencies, I would say animal handling and stealth seem pretty fitting for this character. And then normally I don't talk about tool proficiencies, but for this character, it'll actually be a little important. Go ahead and get smith tools, because this character is going to be using thrown weapons, and thrown weapons can be lost pretty easily, so you might want to be able to make your own. And then the feat we're going to be taking with this is Magic Initiate Druid, and you can pick any cantrip you want here. I'm going to be picking up Thorn Whip and Druidcraft, but the main reason I took this feat is to get Entangle, and this is one of the first spells we're going to reflavor. Entangle essentially makes a 20-foot cube of difficult terrain that also, on the initial casting, any creature that you choose within it, they must succeed on a strength saving throw or have their restrained condition, and then it can take an action action on its turn to make a strength save to end the restraint condition. This is really, really powerful for a first level spell, and I feel like it's very underrated. Usually it's flavored as roots coming out of the ground and grabbing your enemies. But for this character, it's gonna be ice, freezing their legs and preventing them from moving. Not only does the restraint condition give you advantage on attacks against the creature, it also gives them disadvantage on all dexterity saving throws. I'm gonna be taking advantage of both of these, but I feel like the disadvantage on dex saves is very overlooked. For the ability score increases that are included in the background, we're gonna be taking a +1 in strength and a +2 in charisma. What that makes our stats at for level 1 is a 16 strength, a 12 dexterity, a 12 constitution, 8 intelligence, 9 wisdom, and a 17 charisma. And then for level 1, the class we're going to be going with is sorcerer. This is mostly because we plan to take sorcerer anyway, and so we might as well get the constitution saving throw proficiency. As for core sorcerer traits, I'm going to be taking arcana and persuasion. For cantrips, I'm going to be taking ray of frost, sorceress burst, true strike, and then whatever fourth cantrip you'd like. And then I'll pick up shield and ice knife. So guys, I got something in the mail that I want to show you. I got some dice. I'm gonna go ahead and open the dice. So this is from dnddice.com. They sent me these really cool drow themed dice. It did come with this really cool coin as well. My main D&D character is a drow, and so that's why I picked these dice. And if you look, they got beautiful designs on them, and there's a spider in every die if you look hard enough. It even came with a pre-branded pencil and some beautiful stickers. dnddice.com, just like my character builds, has very thematic dice sets with very specific characters in mind. They even have a Paladin set, which if you want to live out this build, this set would be perfect for this character. If you go to dnddice.com/comrade, for every $1 you spend, I will get 25 cents. So if you want to support the channel and also get some awesome dice, then click the link or type in dnddice.com/comrade. I'll get a little bit of a commission. Thank you so much. And with that first level established, let's go ahead and go to D&D Beyond so I can just speed through the next few levels. You can kind of see everything on paper a bit better, and then I'll be back over here when we get to the 6th level damage report. I thought it was recording for like 15 minutes. I now have to say everything again. So we go sorcerer, and you're going to want to pick up javelins and tridents. Javelins are very cheap. They're only 5 silver, so pick up as many as you can with the gold you have, and as many as you can carry. And also pick up tridents. Tridents are definitely more expensive. They're 5 gold. And then pick up scale mail and a shield. You won't be able to use these weapons or wear this armor here at level 1, but don't worry, real soon you'll be able to use them and wear them. That being said, at this level, your AC is only 11. So stay away from danger, maybe even take mage armor, but because our dex isn't very high, it's not going to help you that much. But here at level 2, we're going to be going right into Paladin. And now you can use those weapons, you can wear that armor, you can wield that shield. And the weapon masteries we're going to be going for, it's pretty obvious, but we're going to be going for Javelin and the Trident. Why the Javelin, you may ask? Well, the javelin is very unique in that it's a throwing weapon, but it's considered a melee weapon, and it has a 30-foot normal range and a 120-foot long range. And then it has the slow weapon mastery. That's more coincidental than super helpful, but the slow mastery is definitely not bad for what we're building. And then the trident has a shorter range, at the short range being 20 feet, but it also is a thrown weapon, and it has the topple weapon mastery, which is definitely a better weapon mastery for this build, at least in some very specific situations. As far as spells, you can pick Divine Smite, but you're going to be getting Divine Smite as a class ability here real soon at level 2. So yeah, you can take it temporarily if you'd like. And then pick up some Divine Favor if you want, maybe some Bless. Then we're going to go into Paladin yet again, and you get more spells. Pick up a smite spell if you like. Pick up anything you want, really. Like Wrathful Smite, Thunder Smite, these are all really good. But then here at level 2, we get our fighting style, and we are going to go for Thrown Weapon Fighting. When you hit with a ranged attack roll using a weapon that has the thrown property, you gain a +2 bonus to the damage roll. So this will up our damage by 2 for every thrown weapon attack, which is nice. But then here at level 4, Paladin level 3, we're going to be taking our Paladin subclass. our oath. And this is the Oath of the Ancients. The Oath of the Ancients Paladin is very fitting for this character, not only with its abilities, but also this is essentially the nature paladin. And I feel like one thing that we tend to forget is that the cold winter is a part of nature. We usually think of forest when we think of the Oath of Ancients Paladin, but just like druids, nature is all 4 seasons and all types of environments. And you'll actually see that in their spell list. Oath of the Ancients Paladin at level 13 gets Ice Storm. We're not going to be taking Paladin to that high of level, but if you wanted to, we're going to be utilizing this spell later in the build. If you want to do a variation of this build, going full Oath of the Ancients Paladin or more Oath of the Ancients Paladin than I'm doing, then it's very viable still. But the main reason we're going for Oath of the Ancients Paladin is for Nature's Wrath. It is the Channel Divinity, and Paladins now have 2 Channel Divinity charges per short and long rest. So we're going to be able to use this twice every short or long rest, which is great. I'll go ahead and read it for you though. As a magic action, you can expend 1 use of your Channel Divinity to conjure spectral vines around nearby creatures. Each creature of your choice that you can see within 15 feet of yourself must succeed on a strength saving throw or have the restrain condition for 1 minute. A restrained creature repeats the save at the end of its turns, ending the effect on itself on success. So as you can probably tell, this ability is very similar to Entangle, which we have already acquired, but it's not Entangle. And one of the big differences between this and Entangle is that how creatures end the condition if they fail the initial saving throw, instead of it being an action to make a strength save, they make the save at the end of their turn. So what that essentially means is that if they fail, at minimum, there is a whole turn where they can't move because they can't make the save until they already have ended their turn. And because this is a Channel Divinity and not a spell, it does not require concentration. So you can have Entangle and Nature's Wrath going on at the same time. I would say the most obvious use of this is to cast Nature's Wrath at creatures close to you and then cast Entangle at creatures at a distance from you, because Nature's Wrath, it is specifically cast on creatures within 15 feet around yourself, whereas Entangle has quite a long range. But a less obvious use of this that I think I will be utilizing in this build is casting both on the same targets. And having the same condition on a creature in 2 different ways doesn't add any more effect to it, but what it does mean is if they want to end the restraint condition, they have to succeed 2 different saving throws in 2 different ways. So even in the best case scenario, if they failed Entangle and they failed Nature's Wrath, if they want to stop being restrained, they have to succeed on an action using their strength save and succeed on a saving throw at the end of their turn. So essentially you have the downside of both abilities happening at the same time, and it makes it a lot harder for creatures to be able to stop having the restraint condition on them. And the restraint condition is really bad, a lot worse than a lot of people give it credit for. That being said though, let's go ahead and go to level 5, and that's going to be a level 2 sorcerer. We're going to go back into sorcerer, and we finally get meta magic. I'm going to pick Quicken Spell and Transmuted Spell. You can pick whatever second meta magic you want, but I'm just picking Transmuted Spell just because I feel like it fits well with this build, you know, being focused on cold damage and everything. So already at this level, you can do fun stuff like cast Nature's Wrath, Quicken Spell Ice Knife. You're gonna have advantage on your Ice Knife attack, and then all the creatures that are restrained, they're gonna have disadvantage on the dex save for the big Ice Knife AoE damage. And yes, as a sorcerer, you do have innate sorcery, so you already get advantage on your sorcery spells, but innate sorcery doesn't do anything about your weapon attacks. And you are also going to be utilizing your javelins. I would say in single target situations, focus more on smites and your paladin abilities. In AoE situations, focus more on your sorcerer abilities. But then we're going to go into level 3, and we're going to pick our sorcerer subclass. Now, this feels like an odd choice, but I promise it'll all make sense here soon. We're going to be going aberrant sorcery. Now, I'm sure you're thinking flavor-wise, that seems very odd. Aberrant sorcery is like having to do with psionics, the far realm, telepathy, and it's kind of creepy, whereas holiday Christmassy stuff is a bit more happy and cheery. But Santa knows when you are sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows when you've been bad or good. How does he know these things? I feel like he has some sort of mind reading abilities. That's just me though. Not only that, but the spell list that you get with aberrant sorcery plus having meta magic is just perfect for this build. The main spell we're looking at is Hunger of Hadar, but also also Ivard's black tentacles. And that'll become more obvious as we go through the build. But right now at this level, we can talk in people's minds and see if they've been naughty or nice. And now that we're level 6, let's go ahead and go to the damage breakdown. Alright, I'm doing my damage reports a bit differently. I'm going to keep them a lot more simple for my sake and for your sake. So the ACs and saving throws I'm going to be using for now on is whatever level the character is. So for example, level 6, I'm going to take the average AC and the average saving throw DCs for creatures at this CR level. And then we're going to take 4 rounds of combat, average the damage. I'm going to explain what I do for each round and then tell you the end result. So at this level, the build isn't fully operating the way I would like to, but it's still very effective. For all the DPR for the rest of this build video, I'm going to assume there are 3 targets that are somewhat close to each other. I had a few decisions to make on whether Rime's Binding Ice or Ice Knife would be better, and in most situations, Rime's Binding Ice will be better, but in some situations, Ice Knife will be better. Based on the math that I did, if the creatures are all within 5 feet of each other, which is very uncommon for 3 creatures to be within 5 feet of each other, but if that's the case, Ice Knife will do more damage than Rime's Binding Ice. If 3 targets are within 5 feet of each other, with Ice Knife, the initial hit will do an average of 5.1 damage, and because most likely these 3 creatures have the restrain condition, all of them will be making their dexterity saving throw at disadvantage. But unfortunately, Ice Knife's AoE is very small. But if all 3 targets get hit, it'll be 35.9 DPR for the AoE plus the 5.1 for the initial Ice Knife hit, making the DPR for Ice Knife with 3 restrained creatures within 5 feet of each other 41 DPR. But because I feel like that is less likely to happen, and also Ice Knife doesn't have the speed reduction that Rime's Binding Ice gives, we're going to be going with Rime's Binding Ice. And Rime's Binding Ice will do about 29 damage to these 3 creatures per round when we cast it at 3rd level. And we'll have 2 3rd level slots. So for round 2 and 3, we're going to be casting Rime's Binding Ice at 3rd level. And then round 4, we're going to be casting Rime's Binding Ice at 2nd level. Round 1, we do Nature's Wrath, Quicken Spell, Entangle. Round 2, we do 3rd level Rime's Binding Ice. But before that, we bonus action Innate Sorcery to up that DC. We have 1 sorcery point left, but what we can do is we can, with no action required, we can take a 1st level spell slot and convert it to a sorcery point, and then cast Quicken Spell, Rime's Binding Ice, and do 1 True Strike Javelin attack with our action. And then round 4, we do the same thing, but instead of converting a 1st level spell slot, we convert a 2nd level spell slot, so we can get our 2 sorcery points needed for Quicken Spell, and then we Quicken Spell a level 2 Rime's Binding Ice, and then we do a True Strike Javelin attack. Because in the first round of combat, we're not actually dealing any damage, we're just double restraining creatures, the DPR ends up being relatively low at 25.7, but I need to remind you, we're double restraining targets. Rime's Binding Ice does half damage on a successful save, and if they fail, their speed is 0, and they have to use their action to get rid of the ice. We now have 3 different effects on them that prevent them from moving. 2 that give them the restraint condition, and also 2 that require an action to end. So most likely, no matter how successful these creatures are, they're definitely going to be really annoyed, and they're going to be way less effective at doing damage to you and your allies. As long as they're restrained, all attacks against them are at advantage. So even though this is a low DPR, you are controlling the battlefield great, even at level 6. In a single target scenario, I would do the same in round 1, and then all the other rounds, I would cast True Strike and Divine Smite your enemies with the Javelin at a distance. All right, now we're going to be going into character level 7, and we're actually going to do 1 level of Warlock. Now, I would normally take Pact of the Blade, especially because we are a charisma caster and we are using a weapon. And Paladins love Pact of the Blade, but we're actually going to skip Pact of the Blade and instead go with Eldritch Mind. The only reason we're doing this is because, unfortunately, javelins are a thrown weapon, and unless you have a returning weapon, like for example what we saw in the new Artificer playtest, or you have a very specific rare magic item that I'll show. So this is the Javelin of Backbiting. It's a +2 javelin, and when you throw it, it returns to your hand. It's from Tales from the Yawning Portal, but it is a cursed magic item, so if you roll a natural 1, it'll hit you. This is the only official javelin that returns to you that is not an Artificer weapon. When you throw a javelin, it's now not in your hand anymore, and you would have to use your action to summon a new javelin if you're going to use Pact of the Blade. So there's not a lot of synergy with Pact of the Blade and throwing weapons, at least by default not having a returning weapon or a specific magic item that gives you a returning weapon effect. What we're actually here in Warlock for, though, is Armor of Agathis. It's probably good to take Eldritch Blast too, just to have it. It's a great cantrip to have, especially at higher levels. And then I would probably just take Hex, because it can't hurt to have Hex, you know? I'm not probably going to be using this in this build in the DPR calculations, but Hex is nice to have every once in a while, you know? And now we're going to go level 4 Paladin, and we get our first ability score improvement or feat, and we're actually going to be picking the Mounted Combatant feat. And for our ability score improvement in Mounted Combatant, we're going to go Strength. I'll go ahead and read Mounted Combatant for you. So you get the ability score increase, but then you get Mounted Strike. While mounted, you have advantage on attack rolls against any unmounted creature within 5 feet of your mount that is at least one size smaller than the mount. This isn't that important to this build. But then we have Leap Aside. If your mount is subjected to an effect that allows it to make a dexterity saving throw, take only half damage, it instead takes no damage if it succeeds on a saving throw, and only half damage if it fails. For your mount to gain this benefit, you must be riding it, and neither of you can have the incapacitated condition. And then we have Veer. While mounted, you can force an attack that hits your mount to hit you instead if you don't have the incapacitated condition. So this is mostly to improve our ability to use a mount and to keep our mount alive, and if someone attacks the mount, they instead hit us, which is going to be very important, especially when we combined it with Armor of Agathis. And I think it's just a good idea to have this feat if you're going to be doing a mounted build. And then go ahead and go into Paladin 5, and we get this wonderful feature, Faithful Steed. You can call on the aid of an otherworldly steed. You always have the Find Steed spell prepared. You can also cast the spell once without expending a spell slot, and you regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. I'll be talking more about Find Steed in the level 11 damage report. And then at level 10, we're going to go back into Sorcerer, and we're going to pick up Elemental Adept. I explained this in my recent cold damage video that I did last week, but Elemental Adept isn't really that good at raising damage because it only makes 1s into 2s. But one thing it does do, it takes away resistance from creatures that are resistant to the damage type you pick. And at least based on the 2014 monster manual, which is the only thing we can go off of as of the time of recording this video, cold damage is resisted a lot, but there is very rarely creatures that are immune to it. So Elemental Adept is pulling a lot of weight here as far as making sure you can hit creatures with cold damage effectively. And then we're going to go into level 5 Sorcerer for our character level 11. And this is really when the build starts coming together. All right, before we get too carried away, I'm going to explain mounted combat. And this is with the new updated 2024 rules. A willing creature that is at least one size larger than a rider and that has an appropriate anatomy can serve as a mount using the following rules. Usually that means it has 4 legs and stuff. Mounting and dismounting. During your move, you can mount a creature that is within 5 feet of you or dismount. Doing so costs an amount of movement equal to half your speed rounded down. For example, if your speed is 30 feet, you spend 15 feet of movement to mount a horse. Controlling a mount. You can control a mount only if it has been trained to accept a rider. Domesticated horses, mules, and similar creatures have such training. The initiative of a controlled mount changes to match yours when you mount it. It moves on your turn as you direct it, and it has only 3 options during that turn: dash, disengage, and dodge. A controlled mount can move and act even on the turn that you mount it. In contrast, an independent mount, one that lets you ride but ignores your control, retains its place in the initiative order and moves and acts as it likes. Falling off. If an effect is about to move your mount against its will while you're on it, you must succeed on a DC 10 dexterity saving throw or fall off, landing with the prone condition in an unoccupied space within 5 feet of the mount. While mounted, you must make the same save if you're knocked prone or the mount is. So for our purposes, we aren't going to be worrying about the independent mount rules. We're going to be focusing on the controlled mount rules. So it will move on my turn, and it can use the dodge, disengage, or dash action, which essentially means whatever my mount's speed is, for our purposes, its speed is doubled, because dash is probably what we're going to be using for the mount most of the time. So before we get too into the build at level 11, I want to sort of explain the new Find Steed spell to you. And before I do that, I want to briefly explain the old Find Steed spell. So originally Paladins got Find Steed and then they got Find Greater Steed. Essentially, Find Steed, you got a horse and it had this really cool ability where any spell that you cast on yourself that had the casting range of self would apply onto you and your mount. So for example, if you cast Armor of Agathis on yourself, Armor of Agathis would also be cast on your horse. Same goes for any other spell that has the self range. This made for some really unique combos that unfortunately are not available in the new rules. And then there was Find Greater Steed, which essentially gave you a stronger steed, but it also made it so that they could fly. Now, Find Steed is a class ability, and one thing that's nice about this is classes like bards can no longer take Find Steed before the paladin even gets access to it, so it makes it a little more special, but they also nerfed it significantly. So first of all, you no longer gain the ability to cast self-range spells on yourself and your steed. They gave the steed 3 unique options, so you can pick a Celestial, Fey, or Fiend steed, which is really cool, and they gave it these unique bonus action features that they can use, but based on the controlled mount rules, while you're riding the mount, you can't use any of these abilities. Plus, these abilities are only once per long rest. So I got the stat block right here. For the Fiend, there is Fell Glare. For the Fey, there's Fey Step. And for the Celestial, there's Healing Touch. But these can only be used when you're not mounted on the mount. So Fell Glare gives a creature the Frightened condition. Fey Step allows the mount to do a Misty Step sort of effect, but 60 feet. And Healing Touch just allows the steed to heal someone. There is one benefit though that helps with this build, and it's the fact that Find Steed and Find Greater Steed are no longer separate spells, but instead Find Steed is one spell, and the effects of Find Greater Steed are within the spell Find Steed with an upcast. And because we have a lot of sorcerer levels already, as soon as we gain access to Find Steed, we can use the upgraded version, which requires a level 4 spell slot. And so now, right away, we automatically can pick the Fey option, and we can get a flying reindeer. Technically, the reindeer could be a fiend or celestial, but I feel like Fey is very fitting for a flying reindeer. And we also have Armor of Agathis now. So I'm going to assume that before combat starts, we have Find Steed pre-cast, and we probably cast it multiple days ago, because once you cast the steed, the only way it'll go away is if it dies. It doesn't have a duration or anything. And then in my experience, I feel like you're able to predict combat at least within an hour. If not, Armor of Agathis is just a bonus action to cast. But that being said, we're probably going to be casting Armor of Agathis at 3rd level, and then we're on our reindeer. But like I said, reindeer doesn't have Armor of Agathis, but luckily because of the mounted combatant feat, if anyone attacks the reindeer, we can redirect the hit onto us. Also, we now have access to the Hunger of Hadar spell, and this spell is going to be very important to this build. I already explained the spell in depth in my last video, but essentially in a 20-foot radius, darkness appears. It's not magical darkness, even though it's magic created from darkness. Darkness appears. Creatures within the 20-foot radius are blinded. If they start their turn in the radius, they take cold damage, and if they end their turn in the radius, they make a dex save or they take acid damage. And it's flavored in a very far realmy, aberrant way, but considering this build, I'm gonna reflavor this spell. So we have Chill of the Feywild. You summon a swirling mass of shimmering ice, glittering snowflakes, and spectral fey spirits. A 20-foot radius sphere of darkness appears, centered on a point within range, and lasting for the duration. The sphere is difficult terrain and is filled with eerie sounds of twinkling bells and soft whispers of the winter winds, which can be heard up to 30 feet away. No light, magical or otherwise, can illuminate the area, and creatures fully within it have the blinded condition. Any creature that starts its turn in the area takes 2d6 cold damage. Any creature that ends its turn there must succeed on a dexterity saving throw or take 2d6 acid damage from the angered fey spirits firing acid-infused arrows. Using a higher level spell slot, the cold or acid damage, your choice, increases by 1d6 for each slot level above 30. And with how this new Hunger of Hadar works, it specifically says it's darkness and not magical darkness. So with my 60 feet of dark vision, as long as I don't fly up too high, from up above, I can still see the targets, but they're blinded so they can't see me. So this is how I see the first 4 rounds playing out. On our Steed that has a flying speed of 120 feet because it can dash, we fly in to the horde of enemies. In this scenario, just like every scenario in this video, it's 3 enemies that are relatively close together. We cast Nature's Wrath, restraining these creatures or attempting to restrain the creatures. Then we fly up, ideally 30 feet up in the air. We might take an opportunity attack, but that's okay, because if it hits our mount, it'll be redirected to us, and they'll take some Armor of Agathis damage. At this level, we're going to be casting at level 3, so it's going to be about 15 damage. And I'm going to say, in this DPR scenario, at least 1 hits, and they take 15 damage. In the worst case scenario, we don't get hit, and then we don't take any damage, so that's not really a bad thing. We unfortunately don't have innate sorcery up, but I want to go ahead and cast Hunger of Hadar down on my enemies. Now they're blinded, hopefully restrained, and if they're not restrained, it's difficult terrain in there. I am now 30 feet above them. I can see them, they can't see me, and unless they can get out of there on their turn, they're going to be taking acid damage, and they're going to be taking cold damage. And the acid damage, they have to make a dex save, and that's going to be at disadvantage if they're restrained. Round 2 comes around, I'm going to bonus action activate innate sorcery so I can get those better saving throw DCs. Let me know in the comments. I cast Hunger of Hadar already before I use innate sorcery, but the creatures inside of Hunger of Hadar have to keep making a saving throw at the end of their turn. Is that saving throw my new enhanced DC, or is it the original one when I cast it? In my personal opinion, I think the innate sorcery affects the Hunger of Hadar, even though I already cast it. But then we cast Rime's Binding Ice yet again. So if they somehow make it out of the restrain, they now, if they fail the con save, they'll take a decent amount of cold damage and their speed will become 0. So another way that they're trapped inside this Hunger of Hadar. Round 3 comes around, and we're going to quicken spell Rime's Binding Ice yet again. And depending on if creatures have started to leave, if they're no longer restrained, if they somehow broke out of the ice, you can pick between Javelin or Trident. The tricky thing about the Trident is if you topple them, your attacks will be made at disadvantage, or rather they'll be made at a regular roll because you probably have advantage by either the restrain or the blind. Or you can use slow with the Javelin. I'm going to assume you're using javelins most of the time, so you can keep that advantage on your hits. But let's say they get out of the Rime's Binding Ice slow, they get out of the restrain, Hunger of Hadar has difficult terrain, and then you're throwing javelins at them and slowing their speed by 10. In the final round, the 4th round, you'll essentially do the same thing, but you only have 1 sorcery point left. So as long as you have some lower level spell slots, I would go ahead and convert one of your spell slots to a sorcery point so you can quicken spell Rime's Binding Ice again and make those 2 javelin attacks. One thing that's really cool about the new sorcerer is it no longer requires a bonus action to convert spell slots to sorcery points. You can just do it. And with the lower level spell slots you have access to still, you could cast Quicken Spell a few more times. With all that being said though, as long as those 3 targets stay within the Hunger of Hadar, the average DPR would be 67. Alright, so for the rest of the build, we are just going to be going into Sorcerer. At level 6 Sorcerer, we do get 2 new abilities from Aberrant Sorcery. We get Psionic Sorcery and Psionic Defenses. First of all, we get resistance to psychic damage, and we have advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the Charmed or Frightened condition. So now we have advantage on con saving throws, we have advantage on intelligence, charisma, and wisdom saving throws, and advantage to end the Charmed or Frightened condition. Unfortunately, most ways that the Charmed or Frightened condition happens is with intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throws. So this is essentially a non-feature for our gnome here. But we do get the resistance to psychic damage, and that doesn't hurt at all. But then we get this really unique ability called Psionic Sorcery. When you cast any level 1 plus spell from your Psionic Spells feature, you can cast it by expending a spell slot as normal, or by spending a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level. If you cast the spell using sorcery points, it requires no verbal or somatic component, and it requires no material components unless they are consumed by the spell or have a cost specified in it. Now, you would think, based on the new spellcasting rules, where the only requirement for spellcasting is that you can only use 1 spell slot per turn, you would think that would allow you to use your action to use your sorcery points to cast a spell, and then you would get to use Quicken Spell meta magic to cast another spell. But unfortunately, with how Quicken Spell is worded, it specifically prevents this. When you cast a spell that has a casting time of an action, you can spend 2 sorcery points to change the casting time to a bonus action for this casting. You can't modify a spell in this way if you've already cast a level 1 plus spell on the current turn, nor can you cast a level 1 plus spell on this turn after modifying a spell in this way. It doesn't say anything about spell slots here, so even if you cast a spell with sorcery points, it doesn't matter. You can't then use Quicken Spell to cast another spell, or vice versa. Essentially, what this feature gives you is a way to do subtle spell meta magic if for some reason you are out of spell slots, but you still have a lot of sorcery points. It's actually more expensive than subtle spell, sorcery point wise, because subtle spell just requires 1 sorcery point and it's not dependent on the level of the spell at all. Whereas psionic sorcery, you have to use a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level. So this will either only be useful for us if we're out of spell slots and we want to still cast a spell, or if we are out of spell slots and we specifically want to cast subtle spell. So I feel like this feature isn't that great, unfortunately. And then we go sorcerer level 7 or level 13 character, and we get sorcery incarnate. If you have no uses of innate sorcery left, you can use it if you spend 2 sorcery points when you take the bonus action to activate it. In addition, while your innate sorcery feature is active, you can use up to 2 of your meta magic options for each spell you cast, which is nice. Also at this level though, we unlock the great spell Evard's Black Tentacles. This spell is perfect for this build, and starting here, when I do the damage reports, I'm going to be doing 2, one using Evard's Black Tentacles and one using Hunger of Hadar. The reason for this is Evard's Black Tentacles is one of the best spells at restraining creatures, but it will be doing a lot less damage than Hunger of Hadar. So basically, if you're feeling comfortable that either with your own abilities or your allies' abilities, you can keep people in the Hunger of Hadar, then I would go with Hunger of Hadar. Also, especially because Hunger of Hadar gives them the blinded condition, so they have a harder time of hitting you and your friends if they have ranged attacks. But Evard's Black Tentacles, once per turn, if they move or start their turn in the spell's area, they have to make a saving throw or be restrained again. So unlike Entangle or Nature's Wrath, where there's only one initial saving throw they have to make, and then if they succeed on the saving throw, then they're no longer restrained. Evard's Black Tentacles has them repeating the saving throw over and over again. It also specifically has them do a strength check to escape and not a strength saving throw. And if you look at a lot of creatures' stat blocks that are proficient in strength saving throws, if you take away that proficiency bonus, especially at higher levels, that strength check can sometimes be as much as half as high as the strength saving throw. So depending on the situation, you might want to use Hunger of Hadar, or you might want to use Evard's Black Tentacles. And then just like all the other stuff we're doing in this build, Evard's Black Tentacles can very easily be themed as some sort of ice effect, you know? Maybe it's ice that keeps freezing continually, and as they walk, it continues to freeze their feet. Level 8 Sorcerer, we are just gonna max out our Charisma to 20. And then at level 9, we get 5th level Sorcerer spells. But one spell I actually forgot to mention at level 7 Sorcerer is we get Evard's Black Tentacles, but we also get access to Ice Storm. But then at level 9, we get access to Cone of Cold. And this is where this build becomes very specific with spell choices, and you might be surprised at how effective Ice Storm can be compared to Cone of Cold with this build. See, there's 2 main differences between Ice Storm and Cone of Cold. Cone of Cold requires the creature to make a Constitution saving throw, whereas Ice Storm has creatures do a dexterity saving throw. And because this build is centered around applying the restrain condition on creatures, when I cast Ice Storm, those saving throws are going to be at disadvantage as long as they're restrained. Ice Storm has a smaller area of effect than Cone of Cold, at least from above. Ice Storm will be a 20-foot radius cylinder, whereas Cone of Cold is a 60-foot cone. And if we go 60 feet up in the air and cast it down, which we're planning to do, it'll be a 60-foot radius sphere effectively on the ground, which is huge. So Cone of Cold is going to be a way bigger area of effect, but Ice Storm, based on the dice alone, does slightly less damage than Cone of Cold, but not when you take into account out that most creatures have a lower dex save than a con save, and the dex saves will be at disadvantage because they're restrained. So Ice Storm, all the way to level 20, will be doing more damage than Cone of Cold as long as the creatures are restrained. But just keep in mind, if you can hit more targets with Cone of Cold, then it'll be doing more damage. The difference in damage isn't that much, but Ice Storm is doing more. Also, Ice Storm has a 300-foot range. So one of the strategies we're going to be doing with this build is flying down, throwing our javelins, and then with our reindeer having 120-foot movement, if it dashes every turn, we're going to be able to fly up real high, back up, and still be able to cast Ice Storm. We essentially don't need to worry about range. And if we really want to play it safe up in the sky, we could go up to 300 feet away and basically not have to worry about getting attacked at all. We won't be able to make our javelin attacks as much, but we'll be able to use Ice Storm effectively from the skies without having to worry about getting hit, which is a very effective strategy in my book. Again, if you're inside in a dungeon, which this game is called Dungeons and Dragons, you won't be able to fly up in the sky very high, so you're definitely gonna have to change your strategy a bit. But even in a cramped space, a 20-foot radius cylinder is gonna be a lot easier to cast and not hurt your friends than a 60-foot cone. Then we go Sorcerer level 10, and then we go to Sorcerer level 11. The main things we get is 6 level spells, and we get more meta magic options. You could take Distance Spell and be able to cast Ice Storm at 600 feet up in the air. I don't know why you'd do that, but it's kind of funny. If you haven't taken Subtle Spell, I'd take Subtle Spell. At these higher levels, you're going to be encountering more creatures that can counterspell you, so it'd be nice to have the option to Subtle Spell when you can. Empowered Spell is also a great choice. You'll be able to re-roll your damage rolls, and it's only 1 sorcery point to re-roll 5 dice, so why not? You also, at level 11, get access to Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. So Autoluke's Freezing Sphere is a good spell, but it does less damage than Cone of Cold and Ice Storm at the same level, and it's also a con save like Cone of Cold. If you're in a fight where people are swimming though, it has a really cool effect to be able to restrain targets that are on the surface of the water. So in very specific situations, this spell could be good. It's also a fun way to start a fight. You can actually cast it, make it into a little ball. You could leave it somewhere and it'll explode in a minute, or you can hand it to someone else and they can throw it as an action. So yeah, let's go ahead and go over level 17 damage. So level 17, we have 2 different scenarios that we're calculating for. The only difference is the first round of combat. So we're going to do the same thing where we have Armor of Agathis cast on us, this time at 4th level. So we'll have 20 temp HP and 20 damage if anyone hits us. We're going to fly into the enemy's space, activate Nature's Wrath, hopefully restrain all the targets within 15 feet of us, fly up into the air, willingly taking opportunity attacks to hopefully trigger some Armor of Agathis damage, going up, casting Black Tentacles or Hunger of Hadar as a bonus action with Quicken Spell Meta Magic. Round 2, we're gonna bonus action activate Innate Sorcery and cast Ice Storm. And then rounds 3 and 4, we're going to throw javelins at the enemies and Quicken Spell Ice Storm. The benefit of using Black Tentacles is we have a similar situation, but even better with the Nature's Wrath Entangle combo we used to have, but now Black Tentacles keeps on restraining targets every turn. This is going to be the option you want to do if you have particularly strong enemies or your allies aren't helping you push people back into Hunger of Hadar. I feel as though with the new 2024 rules, with all the new ways to control movement in the game, I could see your party members wanting to help you push things into Hunger of Hadar. So the other scenario where you're feeling confident about keeping creatures in Hunger of Hadar, then I would use that. But that all being said, the DPR for use of Black Tentacles, it's 112 DPR. And then instead, if you go ahead and use Hunger of Hadar, as long as they all stay within the Hunger of Hadar, for all 4 rounds, it's going to be 135 DPR. And a reminder, this damage is specifically 3 targets. So it could potentially be a little bit more, it could potentially be a little bit less. Creatures could escape your Hunger of Hadar, they could escape your Black Tentacles. And if you're fighting a single target, instead of casting Ice Storm with your Quicken spell, I would probably go ahead and throw a smite into that javelin. Either way, you're going to be doing big damage, you're going to be controlling the battlefield, and because of your mount and the different things you can do on the battlefield, you're going to have a lot of survivability, you're going to be doing a decent amount of damage, and your allies will love you for controlling the battlefield. All right, we just have 3 more levels, and we're gonna be sorcerer level 12, and this is our final ability score improvement. I've done this in one of my past builds, and I assume most DMs would be okay with this, but I'm actually going to forego my feat this level, specifically so I can attain an epic boon feat at level 19. Some DMs might let you temporarily have a feat or ability score improvement that you then revoke, and then at level 19 you get the epic boon. I don't know what your DM would do, but that's what I'm doing for this build. If you're not able to do that, I would just get your strength up to 20. Level 13 sorcerer and level 19 character. We are going to get that epic boon I was talking about, and we're specifically going to get boon of irresistible offense. I said a second ago, get your strength up to 20. That wouldn't actually fully work, so I'd probably take some sort of half feat if I wasn't able to take the epic boon, because we're actually going to be getting our strength to 18 here. So your strength is at 17 up until now. So sorry if that was confusing. So we're at 18 strength now, and I want to explain why we went with this. There's actually 2 reasons. First of all, it gets our strength up to 18, which is pretty decent. Most of our damage is coming from our spells, so that's why we didn't prioritize strength very much. We have overwhelming strike, which when you roll a 20 on the d20 for an attack roll, you deal extra damage to the target equal to the ability score increased by this feat. The extra damage's type is the same as the attack's type. So essentially, when we use strength for our javelin attacks and we get a natural 20, we can add 18 damage to the roll, which is really nice. But this is what we really took this for. As a lot of you know, with the new monsters that have already been released, at the time of recording, the Monster Manual 2025 hasn't come out yet. Resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage is going to be a lot more common, and it being magical doesn't matter anymore. And if I haven't already told you in the breakdown, so even though Ice Storm does cold damage, as you upcast it, it does a lot more bludgeoning damage than it does cold damage. We already have Elemental Adept, which gets rid of resistance to cold damage, but because Ice Storm is mostly doing bludgeoning damage, and it's our main source of damage, Overcome Defenses says the bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage you deal always ignores resistance. This doesn't say with weapon attacks, it says just the damage type. So that includes our spells. And this also helps with our javelin attacks, which I'm pretty sure are piercing damage. So yes, this is a level 19 feat, but now we don't have to worry about resistance for basically any of the damage we're doing, which is great. We also get access to 7th level spells, and a spell that might be really good to take and very much fits the theme of this build is Whirlwind. It's a level 7 concentration spell. I'm not going to be picking it for the DPR calculations. It's actually almost perfect. The only reason I'm not taking it is because it's a 10-foot cylinder, so it's a very small radius, and the whole point of this build is to do sort of an AoE control. But if you're fighting a single target, Whirlwind is great. I'll just read it. A whirlwind howls down to a point that you can see on the ground within range. The whirlwind is a 10-foot radius, 30-foot high cylinder centered on that point. Until the spell ends, you can use your action to move the whirlwind up to 30 feet in any direction along the ground. The whirlwind sucks up any medium or smaller objects that aren't secured to anything and that aren't worn or being carried by anyone. A creature must make a dexterity saving throw for the first time on a turn that it enters the whirlwind, or when the whirlwind enters its space, including when the whirlwind first appears. A creature takes 10d6 bludgeoning damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. In addition, a large or smaller creature that fails the save must succeed on a strength saving throw or become restrained in the whirlwind until the spell ends. When a creature starts its turn restrained by the whirlwind, the creature is pulled 5 feet higher inside it. Unless the creature is at the top, a restrained creature moves with the whirlwind and falls when the spell ends, unless the creature has some means to stay aloft. A restrained creature can use an action to make a strength or dexterity check, not saving throw, against your spell save DC. If successful, the creature is no longer restrained by the whirlwind and is hurled 3d6 times 10 feet away from it in a random direction. Ooh. So not only is it a dex save, it restrains creatures and it makes them go up the whirlwind every round, and you're flying on a reindeer. So this spell's super cool, but because of it being such a small radius, I'm not going to be including it in the DPR, but definitely one to pick up. And now we're a level 14 sorcerer, and Aberrant Mind Sorcery has a really interesting capstone that will be at least a little bit useful to us. It says you can unleash the Aberrant abhorrent truth hidden within yourself. As a bonus action, you can spend 1 sorcery point or more to magically alter your body for 10 minutes. For each sorcery point you spend, you gain one of the following benefits of your choice, the effects of which last until the alteration ends. So we have 4 different abilities that we can have active all at once if we want, as long as we have the sorcery points to use it. We have aquatic adaptation, glistening flight, see the invisible, and worm-like movement. I'll summarize most of them, but then I'll go into the one that we're gonna definitely focus on for this build. So aquatic adaptation is pretty self-explanatory. You can swim, your swim speed equals your speed, and you can breathe underwater. Makes sense. See the invisible, you can see invisible things. It's like the see invisibility spell, basically. Worm-like movement is very interesting. Basically, you can go through a space as narrow as 1 inch, and you can spend 5 feet of your movement to escape from non-magical restraints or the grappled condition. That's pretty cool. But glistening flight, this is the one that we're probably going to be using most of the time in this build. It says you gain a fly speed equal to your speed, and you can hover. As you fly, your skin glistens with mucus of otherworldly light. So the main reason we're taking this, even though our reindeer can already fly, right now we don't have anything to really save us if we fall off our reindeer, which could very much happen and probably will. We could obviously take the Featherfall spell, but this makes it so that we have a hover speed. So essentially, if we get knocked off of our mount, we do not go prone, and we can just fly back to our reindeer. So that's pretty sweet. All right, for the level 20 DPR situation, we're doing the exact same strategy as level 17, but with higher level spell slots, essentially. And with the new abilities we have, the damage has been ramped up a lot, and us most likely making our javelin attacks at advantage, we got a decent chance to get some crits and to be able to inflict some heavy damage on those javelin attacks. But with that being said, we are casting Armor of Agathis at 5th level before combat starts, so we have 25 temp HP now and 25 damage potentially. Rush into the enemies, activate Nature's Wrath, fly up, take at least 1 opportunity attack for the damage calculation, quicken spell, cast Black Tentacles or Hunger of Hadar. If it's Black Tentacles, we're casting it at 4th level because Black Tentacles does nothing if you upcast it. And if it's Hunger of Hadar, we're casting it at 6th level now. Then round 2, we are bonus action activating Innate Sorcery and then casting Ice Storm at level 9. Round 3, we're doing 2 of our Javelin attacks and quickening spell Ice Storm at level 8. And round 4, we're doing 2 Javelin attacks and quicken spell casting Ice Storm at level 7. So at level 20, using Vard's Black Tentacles, the 4-round average DPR is 150. And at level 20, using Hunger of Hadar, the 4-round average DPR is 172.5. So pretty good. So I would say this build is very capable on the battlefield. It's very versatile. You are a paladin, so you do have a lot of healing options. You can even heal your reindeer if it takes some damage. You're flying around the battlefield. You're controlling creatures. You're giving advantage on enemies to your allies. The examples I gave for the DPR calculations is only one of the many combinations you could do in a fight. There's so many creative ways you could use Nature's Wrath combined with a different spell that does restrain condition to have 2 simultaneous groups of people being restrained. And being a paladin with 9th level spell slots to be able to divine smite with spell slots that paladins don't normally get access to, in the single target category, you're also doing a ton of damage. And you're doing all of this at range. So in my book, this build is awesome, very fun to make, one of the wackiest builds I've made thus far, and I love it personally. I actually have YouTube memberships. We have 2 tiers. We have Commoner and Comrade. Commoner is $1 a month. You get loyalty badges, custom emojis, and priority reply in the comments. This is more just if you want to support me with a little bit of money. It's just $1. Consider it if you'd like. But if you want to be shouted out in my videos, we have the Comrade tier, and that is $3 a month. In the future, I might make a private Discord channel for all members, but for now, that's what I'm offering. And right now, for everyone, even if you're not a member, I do have a Discord, and the link is down in the description. Anyone can join. I will also say for members, I will be posting member-only posts, and I'll basically be brainstorming with you guys my build videos. So you'll see posts every week where I give you the general idea of the build I'm making, and you can have a say in the build I'm making. So yeah, I would offer early access to my videos, but I get done with my videos very last minute as of right now, but I will definitely offer that in the future when I I acquire a backlog of videos. Anyway, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this video, I have a decent amount of build videos already, and I'm gonna keep continuing making very fun thematic build videos, as well as other D&D content. I also do general commentary where I talk about spell differences and how I thought the new ranger was bad. So if you want to see more of that, go ahead and subscribe, like the video, comment, tell me what you think about this build. And don't forget to check out dnddice.com/comrade. I would love your support. Thank you guys so much. Merry Christmas and happy holidays. Have a great New Year's as well. I'll be back next week with another build video. Peace.